Bam. Well, there it is, my friend. You know who I meant to hit up? I gotta hit up our dude. Where is he at?
Jonathan.
Oh, of course.
Where's he
Ever
at?
he may be. I don't even know. I know, like, we've all been really busy. That's for sure.
Man, you can say that again.
But I'll take it. I'll take it as it is. But anyway, okay. So as we get ready to catch up, because I know it's been a long time. I mean, honestly, we haven't even done anything since 2020, which I just think is phenomenal in and of itself. I mean, this whole year is just already picked up. I follow one of these things on Twitter where it tells you like how long the years progress. I think it's like 7% or something like that. It's concerning, but
It's
I
crazy how
digress.
fast it's going. It's already the end of January.
So anyway, we're going to keep this one very short today. That's for sure. Nonetheless, is I think we're all trying to catch up. It's just been a mind blowing several weeks, just back to back. I know work for you, Jeremy, for myself, and so we got to get caught up. Like Jeremy, what? Oh God, in the news, what is even going on right now? Like I don't know if
Is
anybody else is
something
paying
is something
attention.
happening? I don't. Are we in a trial right now? Is there something going on? Yeah, man. It's. I mean, so we haven't even really. I can't remember exactly the last time we did one of these, but certainly since then, the president of the United States was impeached. Regardless of where you stand on opinions or issues, that's a fact, and that's a very big deal in today's world and any world in American history. So yeah, that happened, and then here we are, a couple of weeks into, maybe a week or so into the actual Senate trial for the president's impeachment. It's crazy, man. It's a wild time to be alive for historical, you know, um, people who are really into history and things like that, like myself. It's exciting, but it's also sort of disappointing. And I think as we get into some of the stories that have popped up between the lines, it's a little bit more disturbing that the victims here are not the people who are on trial or the people who are in the trial, but it's really the American people, and it's the voters who are being held hostage by all this. And it has to happen. It's required by the Constitution. But as you kind of start to pick and read between what's going on inside the actual trial, there's a lot there that's really unfortunate and really says a lot about where we're at in politics. And maybe we should be here. Maybe it's something that we're all going to be better for in the end. But certainly right now, it's hard to see the silver lining.
Oh, there's no doubt there, and it's one of those. Look, I think everybody's getting a little bit of fatigue of just this entire situation for the past few years. But at the same time, it's just something that we do have to pay attention to, right? Like say what you will, but President Trump is certainly has caused me to stay a little bit more into the loop of like what's happening, what's going on, paying better attention. So for like that, I got to give a little bit of credit for better or for
Yeah.
worse.
Yeah,
That's
for
for sure.
sure. For sure. I mean, certainly the 24-hour news networks, you've seen the difference since Donald Trump announced his candidacy. And now, as president, it's pretty much all anybody talks about, to almost to their detriment in some cases. But it's getting views, it's getting people's attention, it's getting people talking. The biggest thing is, though, the divisiveness has not only continued in that time period, but it's gotten, I think, to an all-time low or high, depending on how you look at it. There's no question that the country is split right down the middle, and
Mm-hmm.
the people who would try to exist in the middle, whether it's based fact or opinion, it's really they get forced into one side or another. I know that I have certainly been identified as a whining, bleeding heart liberal more than one occasion, and I like to think that myself. I try and focus on the facts. I try to focus on the truth, and I think there's a lot of people out there who specifically in the media, who really do try to call it down the middle. But because they're part of the media, because they're in this sort of this bubble that has been created for them, they get pushed into that sector of nonpartisan or sorry, nonpartisan partisan agenda, whatever, that certainly causes a lot of the discourse that's not valuable to advancing the conversation. And my goal, certainly, in talking about this with you and in sharing with people, is that facts are important. Facts matter. And yes, I do have some concerns and some things that we've talked about before on this show, where there's certainly some things I wish were different about the president of the United States. But at the end of the day, this is happening, and there's a lot that's happening right now that people are turning a blind eye to, and it's a big deal. When we look at what President Trump is being accused of here, the fact is, it's a big deal. It's not something you can push
Well,
under the rug.
yeah, I mean, look, of course, it's a big deal. I find it interesting, like when I go back and like you'll hear like Lindsey Graham's old recordings and whatnot, right? And then what they have to say about Clinton. Which, look, say what you will, right? But like, yo, Clinton straight up lied, right? So he got in trouble not necessarily for the act in of itself, but the fact that he lied, under oath. That's basically what really got him. But here we are, right? And from whether it's all the excuses, like that part, I just don't understand. And it's really interesting to me because we know that a lot of them are up for reelection this year as well. And it seems that they play that it's more important for them and their reelection than it is for them to do what's right and by the values and morals that they say they stand by. I think that's my biggest gripe about it, right? Like I get some people's like take on it, like they like the guy for whatever reason, and look, I mean, it's understandable. That's certainly your prerogative. Have it at what you will, but I don't understand two separate sides of standards here. Like it's got to be
Yeah.
applied to everybody, and I think the more that you just bypass and you let it go, then the more it emboldens anybody, and you just take away from democracy. And look, again, I know everybody's getting a little tired of it. I could say like I'm a little bit exhausted to a degree, but still as a citizen, you can argue like we have certain rights and certain privileges as well, but these are something that our ancestors have certainly fought for. And look, you can't take it lightly. And I don't care which side you're on. Like straight up wrong's wrong, a lie is a lie, truth is truth. And then that's it. Just like point blank, full stop. And while, it's very clear, like especially now more than ever, like I lead Democrat for obvious reasons because I just think Republicans in general, not every individual, but in general, have lost their way. Look, you got to call a spade. And at some point, like, I don't care who it is. Like, I'm not going to make excuses just to make excuses because it was a choice. I made a lot of choices in my life. I thought they were good. And when they turned out not to be good, then, I just acknowledge it, right? Like, there's nothing we can do in the past to change, but clearly there's something we can do now and moving forward. That includes holding this president responsible.
Well, and you made a good point, which is, when you mentioned Republicans maybe have lost their way a little bit, I think it's fair to say that politicians in general have kind of lost their way over the last little while. I can't begin to tell you how disappointed I was in the Democrats on Capitol Hill, specifically in the House of Representatives, for the way that they handled this impeachment business. I think that they had an obligation to call it down the middle, to be fair about it. And they focus so much on the strategy, which I understand why they did that. But I think in some cases, you just have to trust the truth is going to come out. You have to be honest with the people, and you have to be less about, how does it make you look, less about how does it hurt your chances to get the ultimate goal, which is a president being removed from office, and be more about the facts. And the facts are that we just found out that John Bolton, National Security Advisor to the president, was told during the time in which this was being sort of discussed with Ukraine that aid was being withheld because President Trump was looking for them to cooperate in doing an investigation into Hunter Biden, Joe Biden, essentially his political rivals. Now we know, I mean, we have all sort of suspected that that was exactly why the aid was being withheld, but the Republicans are arguing the reason that he should not be impeached or he shouldn't be removed is because there's no evidence of that. There's no proof of that. There's no testimony of that. Well, now we've got somebody who is very close to the president, who was not allowed to testify during the House trial, who was told by the White House not to testify, who withheld testimony, who's now saying in a book for his own gain that, yeah, Trump did tell Bolton that that's why it was being withheld. So if John Bolton goes under oath and says this, that testimony is used to do everything to basically blow a hole in the president's defense here in what he's being accused of.
Well, even look at the defense. The defense, honestly, is pretty weak. I mean, like I just don't understand. We're still having this conversation. Like he's bringing up things about the Bidens, and that's the worst. Like, don't get me wrong. If there's, let's say, a particular investigation needs to happen, it needs to happen. But my thing is, we're talking about you and your accountability. To me, I don't differentiate this from if I get pulled over and the police are asking me questions about me speeding, and my response is, well, look over here. This person over here on the road is also, they're going 80 and try to deflect. The police officer going to look at me like, I didn't pull them. I pulled you over, right? Like we're talking about you. And I don't understand how continuously, right? Like we could be fooled by this over and over again. I'm like, look, nice try with the deflection, but right now the heat is on you. And look, it's very clear what he did with Ukraine. I mean, I don't even understand why we're still debating it. Like It's flat out. Like you can listen to, like, your innuendos when somebody is trying to solicit you and do some sort of like, hey, I'm going to set this up. There's something I want in return. This quid pro quo. I don't have to turn around and say something like I want something extremely directly for that to be right. What's the hidden message? And it's almost like we lost our way, and people are choosing to see what they believe versus believing what they're seeing. And I think that's where you just have to swiftly draw the line there. Like it doesn't matter who's in office, it doesn't matter who the party is. It is very clear what's occurred. And again, it's like, what standards do we have? Do we accept this? And let's say if we start accepting this, then everyone does it. And is that the route that we want to go? Is that true to our values? And I think the answer is very clear. But again, and maybe this is why, like, lesser type of comments there. And I agree with Jimmy. Look, I have to say, like, look, sorry, Trump is trash to me, right? Like, I can see where people originally had a lot of faith in this guy. And look, even though I never liked him from the get go because I thought it was very clear what we're getting, that's none of my business what people choose to vote for and what they stand for, and I'm fine with that. But it's like there is no bottom here, right? Like if this is acceptable, then you may as well say, you know what, no law applies to the president and let them run the country as they see fit.
Yeah, it's. I mean, the precedent that you're talking about is really a dangerous one, especially when you look at the fact that the Ukraine was largely was trying to get help from the president because of a war that they were potentially facing with Russia that's been going on now for quite a few years. And I mean, we're not talking about political favors for dirt on an opponent that has no consequences. The money that Ukraine is using is to protect the civilians of Ukraine from a powerhouse like Russia, who's been known to make those judgment calls in the past that have cost people their lives. So I think at the end of the day, the precedent is pretty dangerous.
I feel like
I'm just hearing myself.
but there's more. That was on my end. Go ahead. Sorry
Is
about
that what I sound like? Oh my gosh, poor viewers.
that.
No, it's at the end of the day, I think the precedent that it sets is a very dangerous one because right now, in this case, you've got the Ukraine who's looking for money against Russia. But what happens when Russia's looking for money against the Ukraine, and Russia can help with a political agenda? What happens when somebody like Vladimir Putin or some of the less, I guess, cooperative nations with the European Union and the United Nations, like some of these outsiders who have been known to sort of go rogue in the past. What happens when they're ready to give Trump dirt on somebody or another president dirt on one of the opponents? That having that precedent be the standard where it's okay to run political errands through state funding is just, it's a dangerous precedent. It's terrifying when you think of, just we're talking 20 years from now, what could this landscape of the world look like when it comes to powerhouses, who's on top, who's really dominating technology, who's dominating AI, who's dominating all these areas that we haven't even seen really starting to come into the conversation yet. China, for instance, what happens when China has something that they want from the US and that precedent has been set, or the other way around? So I think it's very important that people who reacted to this when it first came out as saying this would be a big deal if there was a quid pro quo, specifically some of the Republicans on Capitol Hill, need to own that. Now there is proof that this was a quid pro quo, and there's more than enough evidence from testimony, from direct testimony, from this leak from John Bolton, from this evidence that's been leaked by Lev Parnas, that this is not a situation where there was no quid pro quo. There was a quid pro quo, and now we're getting to the point where we have to decide if it's wrong, then what gets done about it? What is the end result? Is this something where we have to stop it now so that it doesn't creep into the future, or are Republican votes more important? And I think we're starting to see the answer, unfortunately, that votes are more important.
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, there's no two ways about it. It is what it is there. But again, I think just as a people, we have to decide. Like, I look and I'm like, when is it that you stop serving your country and you serve you? And I think you stop serving your country and you serve you when you put literally yourself ahead of country. And that's exactly what a lot of these individuals in the Senate is doing. And don't get me wrong, like I can understand from a human element why some people are torn and they're tempted to do what's best for them and get the attention. I get that, but they also do hold a higher office, right? And I think, when you do that and you have your constituents that you have to answer to, look, you have to do what the right thing is. And maybe I just don't understand it because I'm like, look, nobody's going to put me on blast or anything. I don't care who it is. Like Trump said, like, you put me on blast on Twitter, then go right ahead, right? Like that clearly shows you're not even, paying attention to doing things you need to do. And I just don't understand, like, the allowment of what's happening here for him using Twitter as a bully pit there to get people online. I just don't think is the way that you conduct yourself as a president or anything for that matter, right? Like the cancel culture that we hate so much that people say that they can't stand the political correctness, right? Like this is the exact like counter version of it. It seems counterintuitive to that, meaning it seems cool when someone's not being politically correct at a time, but it also has some serious repercussions in this particular case. And I mean, look, I've just seen it over and over and over again, and it can easily turn people to say, oh, well, anything we do, nothing we do matters. So you just may as well let it be what it is. We don't have any sort of control or any sort of say so. And that's what we're getting. And I feel like a lot of the youth has felt that way for a long time. Hence why the youth doesn't necessarily get out there and vote, which is problematic in and of itself. But I think this will either do one of the two. It'll either drive more people to pay attention, to vote and do things, or it will cause people to further disconnect, cause further discourse, and then we can lose our democracy because of it. So it's certainly something to think about.
Yeah, and if you look at sort of the landscape of the political scene right now in the United States, I mean, obviously, what's up, Knox? Obviously, uh, there's some Republicans out there who are in a situation where they now have their constituents who are avid Trump supporters, voters. They've been that way since 2016 and have committed to being that way in 2020. Who they're now up against? Do they give away their race, their election race, because they want to seek the truth in this impeachment drama? Or do they, like you said, do they serve themselves and they say, you know what, we're just going to sort of sit silent. We're going to pretend we didn't read any of the transcript. We're going to pretend we didn't see any of this that's happening. And then at that point, they are putting themselves over country. This is like that video of that guy who.
No, I know I'm on mute. I'm doing that purposely because my kid's trying to. He's trying to get.
No, you're good. This is like remember that video of the guy who's on at BBC and his kids walked in and the nanny came screaming in the background.
Oh yeah, that's totally.
I just got
me right now.
I just got that right
hey.
now. But then you look at the other side too, and the Democrats. There's an election happening right now. Iowa caucus is in like a week or something. That's very soon. It's right around the corner.
Mm-hmm.
And looking at the candidate pool, there just doesn't seem to be the types of individuals who can really face what this country needs, who really sees, what this is going to be all about. Oh boy. All right. We got a problem now.
Yeah. I'm like, I'm pulling
so I'm going to log off this stream real quick. So
hey, you got to sit down, buddy.
If it comes to either side of the political spectrum, Democrats, Republicans.
Okay, where's your phone? You can't come up here.
We're tagged. We're in a lot of trouble on both sides.
Yeah, there we are. There it goes. There goes that crying. There it is. Exactly.
There it is.
Just cannot escape as a parent. And there's no other way to get around it. Like, wife has a headache. She's done. And I'm like, well, we can always wait forever.
And it's been such a long time. We were due.
Too long.
We were due. I'm just taking notes right now.
Yeah, well,
Anyways.
I was like, hey, sit down.
One day I'll need these notes. Not today. Today is not that day.
No. But yeah. Hey. So there we go. That's how it goes. I know.
Should we try
I know for
again?
some people they're like, oh gosh, kids cries, but it is what it is there. But I'm gonna mute myself for one more second because I'm gonna go ahead and move him.
Okay.
And I'll be right back.
I'll go on a long-winded soliloquy here.
Yeah, please do.
Larry, what's up, Larry? How you doing? So, anyways, apologies to the viewers. Being a dad, you guys get it. I don't know. I don't know if Terrence knows he's not muted. Maybe he is.
No, that I don't. But look, I'm just continuing. So anyway,
You want to try again tomorrow?
no,
I mean,
it's just one of those. You just power through it. You
power
just
through
power
it.
through
All right. All right, let's power through
So
it.
Jeremy says, let's talk about what the Dems are doing wrong. Yeah, what? So okay, that's fair. That's fair enough. Look, first and foremost, Jonathan. The Dems do a lot of things wrong, right? Like Democrats, I'm like, can you guys get it together? Certainly, Democrats just do not know how to win, right? And like one thing I'll say that I feel that they're doing wrong, in all honesty, is like, look, I get it that you want to play by these higher ground morals and this sort of thing here, but look, if you can't show up to a gunfight with a knife, and in this particular case, if they're not going to be playing nice, I say don't play nice either, right? And then the other side's just going to have to eat it. I think what we see with like gerrymandering and everything else, it just proves to show if you're not willing to play the game, you're just going to get crushed. And I mean, the problem I have, though, like kind of a counterpoint to that statement, though, Jonathan, is if the Democrats start, let's say, fight fire with fire, at some point they could also possibly go too far. You know what I mean? And then there is no moral ground. So that's kind of like the other side of it that makes it a bit problematic. So I don't know any of your particular thoughts, but Jonathan, I will agree with that other statement too. They learned nothing from 2016. I would agree with that. Maybe with the exception of they certainly are turning up the heat a little bit. They could do a lot better, but yeah, he could have an easier time around. There's no doubt about that.
So, Jonathan, I think the big message for the Democrats and what they really weren't able to do, or what they did wrong, leading up to this election, was that they really tried to make this about Trump. They tried to make this all about beating Donald Trump. And sure, they had their individual agenda that they all tried to perpetuate through debates and through the discussion. But because I think what happened in the beginning was they saw so many
There
opportunities
we go again.
where there was just a guarantee that this was going to be a landslide for the Democrats, that Donald Trump was such a disaster. He's got Russia going on. He's got all this stuff with the drama and the controversy, and there's no way that lightning strikes twice, that the Democratic pool turned into an Olympic size swimming pool of candidates. And they had so many people, and Marianne Williamson, they had a bunch of senators nobody's ever heard of, mayors, people from districts that had no business winning a Democratic primary, who were coming out saying that they were going to be the Democratic nominee because they could beat Trump. And they didn't spend enough time talking about not only their individual agendas, but the Democratic agenda. So looking at things like Medicare for All, and Medicare for All could be a very big part of the election in 2020, because the Democratic ticket is largely going to be based around the plans for Medicare and either revamping Obamacare or repairing the damage that Trump has done to the to the Democrats' message of healthcare. However, there was so much disagreement around just how to do that, between whether people should keep their private insurance, whether they should be allowed to keep their private insurance, whether they had to go through their employers, whether they were to be penalized for not having any. All of these sort of disagreements. And what it came down to was healthcare wasn't a big enough part of the discussion around the Democratic primaries. You're talking about voting right now, and the two frontrunners for the Democratic primaries are Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden. Elizabeth Warren, Andrew Yang, all going to have this sort of these influences in certain states that are going to make this a very, very tight race, because all they did was focus on beating Donald Trump and not enough talk about the actual issues that people in the Democratic Party care about.
I agree. To Jonathan, to keep that narrative going. Look, that's exact. I think you're spot on with that, Jeremy. Like it's borderline just frustrating. I don't want to use the word infuriating. It was perhaps a little too strong, but it's like, look, I'm tired of hearing about this dude, right? Like we gotta make sure we move forward with it. Talk about what you're going to do. Like, it's very clear. And again, I know like some of my friends, I know you're avid Trump supporters, but look, there's some of us who are tired of this dude, don't necessarily want a better option. And honestly, see, this is the craziest part. I don't care if it's Republican or Democrat personally, right? I mean, I would have to say, like, I guess a little bit that can be untrue, just because I'm just so turned off by nobody stepping up from the Republican Party. But back to the Democrats here, like, look, focus on your message. Like, some of way too many people on stage, way too convoluted. And I'm just like, look, get on with the debate and give us something meaningful because nobody wants to hear that.
Well, and the big story from the last Democratic debate was whether or not Bernie Sanders told Elizabeth Warren that a woman couldn't win the presidency. I mean, I understand that that's an important message, but it's like, why are we talking about that? We've seen Bernie Sanders' record. We've seen the discussions that have been had. Like, there's probably some, if there's any truth to that, it certainly doesn't affect how he feels when he's on stage talking about the issues, right? So if we're going to pretend that we're going to lean on every single word the president says all of a sudden, and we're not going to, sort of hold the current president to the same standard, why is that the story? Why can't we talk about the fact that, the person who's really doing the fundraising, the people who are really leading in the polls are not getting any airtime. They're not getting any screen time. What is getting screen time is this impeachment business. And not to mention the fact that there are three major candidates running for president who are currently in the impeachment trial, not on the campaign trail, not going to Iowa, not going to Michigan, not going to Ohio. And these are the things that Hillary Clinton did that lost her the election, right? So what we have to find is the candidate and the opportunity where, what's the best situation for everyone here? Is it Trump getting reelected and then the Senate switching to a Democratic majority Senate? Maybe that is the best option. Maybe that is the best option because then at some point we can sort of transition out of the Trump dominating, the way that he has with executive orders and just having the senators on Capitol Hill really vote for anything he says. Or is it the other end? Is it Trump getting removed from office, but is it the Senate staying Republican and the House maybe losing a couple of seats? And I don't know. The thing is, the most important election that's happening in November of 2020 is not Donald Trump versus whoever. It's really the Democrats on Capitol Hill being able to maintain their possession of the House or maintain the Senate, because whatever. And I think we have to acknowledge that the best case scenario for everybody would be if there was some representation on both sides. Because right now, for as much divisiveness as there is, if one side takes the super majority, like we're seeing that in Canada already, where the Democrat or the liberal government has been overthrown. It's a conservative supermajority now, and the people, the guy in the parliament, Justin Trudeau, is a super liberal, right? So there's nothing happening. He's been in Costa Rica for the past 4 weeks, pretty much, just riding his reelection. And it's like, do we really want to see that for our country? I would agree that we don't.
Yeah, look, I think you bring up a lot of valid points here, and I think that the main thing is, look, there's got to be some sort of balance here. And I know not everybody may appreciate centralists, but look, that's the way that democracies have to work. There has to be gives or takes. And right now, there seems to be a lot of taking and not a lot of giving, and I think that's a recipe for disaster. And so, the other thing that I'm totally turned off by, and this doesn't matter to me whichever side, when I run into people that get very infuriated with some of the different imposing views and says, oh, this person's like a Democrat, they're an idiot, I can never speak to them. Or, oh, they're Republican, they're an idiot, I can never speak to them. It just makes me look and be like, okay, wait a minute, what kind of person are you, right? Like the fact that you are not open to anybody else's point of views, even when it's completely opposing, you don't like it. Like prime example, again, I think it's clear, I do not like Trump. But there are certain things that he does that it's like, look, you give credit where it's due. Like I'm not trying to find every single reason to not like this guy and to knock this guy. But I find that a lot of our fellow Americans, this is exactly what they do. They just find one specific narrative where everything's against them. People do not think illogically. They're thinking very emotional, and they get very team based, which, again, is just something I don't understand. And I just think it's to the point now where people have got to really get back to the center here and understand people are going to have opposing views. Try to understand where they're coming from, have a healthy debate about it, and then move forward with it. But this behind the scenes or this, I'm going to stick with this one particular team because that's my team, like we're treating it like it's a sport, I just think it's just, that can be extremely detrimental to democracy. And at some point, one or the other is going to overtake, and it's going to cause problems.
I think it goes without saying that the team mentality comes from not just the current situation of politics, but also just the day and age where we are. Being able to adopt a team or a politician as a team, it's pretty much what we've been conditioned to do with social media. Is you agree with me or you don't agree with me, and if you don't agree with me, you don't agree with anything I'm saying. And I think more than anything, since over the last, I would say 3-4 months, the message of tolerance needs to be one that's spread not in the way that the left or the Democrats or liberals or whatever, not in the way that they're spreading it, but in the way that it needs to be spread by the definition of the word. You can't fight tolerance with intolerance. You can't go about saying, I'm the most tolerant person because I think that gay people should be allowed to get married, and I think that transgender rights, and I think this and this and this. And if you don't agree with me, not only do you hate gay people, but you are a devil. You don't believe in God. You're not true to your own religion. Like the whole thing with Ellen and George W. Bush, I think was
totally
a good example of that. It's just it's not about what somebody has done. It's about who they are and what they believe. It can be two different things. It can, it doesn't mean that because, again, like I've definitely mentioned this before, my grandfather and I saw very differently on almost everything. In fact, my grandfather was referred to as the George W. Bush of Canadian politics on more than one occasion, where we would disagree with almost everything. But the one thing I would defend until the day I die is the fact that he was a good person and he didn't hate gay people. He didn't hate, anybody who disagreed with him. He didn't hate anybody. And I think the tolerance message has been so overwhelmingly, sort of captured by one side that all sides are losing the definition of it. All sides are losing the value of it. And so, when Eric says something like, what did he say? Love or hating the country's doing well under this administration. That will be tough for any Democrat to beat. I agree with that statement. I think that statement is true in some respects. Now, is the country doing better than it would be under somebody else? I don't know. Is it doing better than it was under Obama? I don't know. I'm not sure that it is because society has such a divide down the middle. And I'm not going to blame that on Trump, but I'm certainly not going to say that he wasn't a part of the attributing fact to that.
Yeah.
However, one last point, and then I'll finish up.
Sure.
However, I think what it comes down to is whether or not he's been good, whether or not you support him, are you able to take that message that he's been good, it's going to be tough for any Democrat to beat? Are you able to take that and separate it when this issue of the impeachment comes up? When the fact that there's a very dangerous precedent being set that any Republican, any Democrat, any leader in the White House can solicit any help with an election by mandating foreign aid as the balance, by saying, I'm going to hold your funding, the things that protect you, your safety, I'm going to hold it hostage for my own personal gain. Regardless of how you feel about him, that's the question that I think everybody's looking to the Republicans on Capitol Hill in the Senate right now to answer. And I'm really worried that when we don't see that result, the people in the public eye who are adopting these teams, as you said it, are going to be the ones who are really taking this message and spreading the intolerance that we were just referring to.
Yeah, look, I think that's the biggest thing right now. If anything, I would say that's the biggest issue that we have going on in the country, right? Is do we rip ourselves apart? Do we get rid of our democracy because of this intolerance? And it's just an unfortunate situation that even our own president, I mean, I've never seen anybody rally so much. I feel like his rallies, I mean, this guy has more rallies than I do work meetings. We know we have a lot of work meetings. And so I never really understood, like, okay, wait a minute, why do you go to these things? And then, for instance, the them and us, right, and the separation. I just don't believe that anybody, especially of such high caliber, should do any sort of separation. There's certainly particular views that you do have, but that's just it. Like you got to be more about uniting people than dividing them. And again, when you have different opposing ideas, got to bring it to the table, ready to defend them, and also ready to talk about them. And so I think it's just very interesting in general that here we are, it's such a divisive time, and yet I still believe that we have more in common than we do in difference. And I think that's just something that we kind of really get back to. And so,
it's wild to see some of those opportunities of being brought together and just seeing the people you disagree with on almost every social issue, and now you're saying the same thing. And it's like, how different are we? How really differently do we view this? I think we would find that line of tolerance exists somewhere in there.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And, and this is, again, we've been seeing it in past comments, like things have been pretty civil this round. And I don't know if because a lot of things are coming to light or whatever the situation is. But, I've even seen it, when we've done a couple little podcasts in our own our live shows where we see this. And I mean, when I go out in public and sometimes I can hear some conversations that are happening, sometimes I'm very surprised at how toxic these things can be. And, every now and then, depending if it seems semi-safe, that I can hop in, I do. And it's where I try to come to more so an understanding. Like instead of trying to prove a point, I'm trying to understand where they're coming from. And instead of maybe, let's say, diverting the facts or this sort of thing, instead I'll just try to question them, right? Like get them to come to their own conclusion. Like, wait a minute, there is some sort of line here. I don't necessarily have to state it for me, but even if it just gets them thinking about it, then in my view, that's certainly a win. And then to Jonathan's point, just really quickly here, the media, yeah, look, the media definitely does play a large role into to what's going on, and shame on the media for it. And it's one of those where, look, not all media is created equal, so I want to be very careful there. I think there's journalists out there that are really doing one hell of a job, and they're trying to get the information out there. And then, of course, there's some clown shows that certainly do occur. But the interesting part is this. I see you, Eric, with like the media is dividing us. True, but also I will say the media is like the drug dealer, and we're like the druggie here. They're giving us what we want and what we're fiending for. And the problem is until we change our own behaviors and stop rewarding that, that's never going to happen. When you see like this clickbait mentality and everything that's occurred, why does that happen? Because people go for it, right? They fall for it. If we started to look, and we can clearly decide by just looking at some of the titles what's going to be garbage versus what's going to have likely any substantial information, we got to stop clicking on it. And I think when we play into it and we let that be the main voice, that again, the squeaky wheel is the one that gets the oil in this particular case. This is a continuing thing that happens, and I think that we also, the people, we do play a part of this, because let's be very, very mindful here. The media is an exact reflection upon us. As a matter of fact, for those of us who voted for Trump, think about how the media, what it did for him. As a matter, we voted for him for that very reason, right? I mean, think about it. Otherwise, he would have. You know what I'm saying? Like,
I think it's important also to understand that the media doesn't pick sides. The media just chooses whatever side is going to be most profitable for them.
Exactly. Whatever's going to get the most attention.
It's not based on the candidate. It's not based on And if you disagree with me, the only reason Donald Trump got elected to the Republican ticket was because CNN wouldn't leave him alone. I mean, Fox News, sure, Fox News was probably more of on the never Trump train than anybody else. But the fact that CNN wall-to-wall coverage of the Republican primary with Donald Trump, ignoring Bernie Sanders versus Hillary Clinton to the point where Hillary Clinton basically stole the election from Bernie Sanders. This is just one example of the media just doing what the media does. And you have to. I guess you can blame the media for doing what they do, but it's sort of like a necessary evil that has always existed, not just since Donald Trump became president or since he was nominee. But the media has always been there. And sure, it's gotten a lot more severe. But to your point, Terrence, it's not because of the media. It's because of the people consuming the media. The avenue of consuming media has become so more accessible. It's also been so more debatable, and discussion has been so much more geared towards it. And because these 24-hour news networks like CNN, Fox, MSNBC, they get so many more views now, because anytime something happens, today, for instance, think about, like, before Trump was elected, do you think people would be watching probably one of the most boring 7 hours of television that I've ever seen over the last 2 days when it comes to these arguments that are being made? Because number one, the arguments have already been made till everybody's blue in the face. We know what they're going to say before they say it. The real stories are what's happening behind the scenes, yet they're still getting these views. They're still getting these clicks. We have to give ourselves a little bit of the blame there for that, but we also have to take the ownership in saying it's not just about what the media says that we have to buy into. Eric said 107,000 tonight for Trump in New Jersey. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of people out there, but that venue holds 9,700 people. So, there's not, I'm sure there's a lot of people outside, but let's also take the fact that the media perpetuates their own stories in whatever way they go. And it's up to us to be able to distinguish what is fact and what is fiction. Right. And at the end of the day, whether it matters, does it matter if Trump's lying about his crowd sizes? No, he always has and he always will. At this point, it's time for us to focus on the matter at hand, the issues that are going on, and not give the media the ability to divide us this way. I mean, I get that they do it, but they do it because they do it, and it's up to us to not let them do it.
Yeah, I don't. So, I guess let me try to draw a real fine distinction here. And by the way, I like PJ Tom's here, his viewpoint. Is that I'll just get to it. Pretty much that we have fact checks, right? These tools are at our fingertips, but we're more lazy than ever to go through and relook at it. And and look, I think there's a lot of truth to that. And it's rather unfortunate that I mean, I've watched and heard people like, for instance, when the whole speaking of Eric with people didn't trust Clinton. You know how many people believe that she was running this ring in a pizza parlor, right, with these kids and whatnot. Like this is crazy to me,
I
right? And
still
some
think
dude
that.
shows up, right? Like this is crazy, but people absolutely do believe it. And look, I get why some people may have been turned off by her personality or whatnot, but it's just interesting to me where we may go one way, but not necessarily the other. Like, and I see your question, Jonathan, when we get there. Like, and by the way, CNN ratings have plummeted because it can't be. No, I don't think that's necessarily true at
CNN
all. That's
ratings have not plummeted.
no. If anything, I think all the ratings are up. They're not down. I don't know where you've gotten that from. That sounds like a Trump narrative. But Jonathan, there, who is the Dems' best bet to get behind in your opinions? Ooh, I think that's such a tough one. That is definitely a toughie. Um,
Jonathan, you and I have talked about it, so I won't go too far into it.
well, okay. Well, let me try to take a stab, and then this is such a tough one. Like, okay, for me, the jury is still out on it. There's a few I do like, right? I get it. Some people try to say like, Biden's a safe choice, which I think that's maybe the opposite from it, right? I'm like, I don't know if people want a safe choice, but okay. Um, I do like a lot of things that Elizabeth Warren says, but I'm a little concerned, especially on the tech part and the breaking up of companies. Like, I understand where she's coming from because let's be honest, like, look at what Amazon's killing, right? Amazon, a major corporation, they're coming through. They did a lot of things for the good. It certainly exposed, let's say, FedEx's poor practices, which is why, like, 2020, 2021, they may even get purchased. Who knows? But also look at how many stores that they're closing. A lot of stores are closing not because people's behaviors per se have changed. They've shifted, true, but also Amazon has shuttered them and put them out of business. And so at what point do you say, okay, wait a minute, we do need to break these major companies up versus keeping them? And I'm a little bit weary on some of the policies that she may have. Just because I'm like, well, we live in a global, just a global market. I don't care what anybody says. It's a global world these days. So let's say you do break up Facebook, for instance. What's to say TikTok's not going to stop, right? We know something about the Chinese. We don't see their government ever trying to prolong or break them up or restrict them in any sort of way. And so that may, backfire. Maybe that's where the world is going. So I question a few of those things. And then Bernie, he definitely was my choice last time. Like, I know, like, a lot of you may not trust Hillary. I didn't necessarily have an issue with her personally. That's just me. But Bernie was the guy that I went for. Again, I don't necessarily agree with all the particular policies. Some do see a little bit more further out there than I would prefer. But I think, just like many presidents, once they do get in office, some things do get reeled in because reality certainly strikes. But for me, I still think I'm still kind of leaning on Bernie. That's just me. I know you call him Loco Bananas. You know who you are in that one. But I'm like, look, I think the same about your boy. But people out there supporting. So anyway,
I distinctly remember back in 2016 when the two options were really Bernie or Hillary. I did a lot of research into Bernie, and I wouldn't call myself a Bernie bro necessarily, but the one thing that I think the country would need from the leader is somebody who really knows how to lead, and somebody who genuinely believes what needs to be done and can't be bought, can't be purchased by lobbyists. I think the political finance system is probably one of the more problematic pieces of democracy today. For that reason, I think if I had to choose today, and I will have to choose in probably about a month and 2 days, but if I had to choose today, I would probably lean more towards the Bernie side, just because I genuinely believe him, and I trust him in that what he's saying is actually what he's putting out there as potential laws. And I also look at his track record, and I see somebody who's gone a long way back, a long, long time, fighting for the things that he says are valuable today. Not a lot of change in his messaging. I think that could be problematic in some cases, just because I think somebody who doesn't have the ability to change in their opinions isn't necessarily a good thing. But at this point, like I said, it's not, for me, the 2020 election is not about the primary. It's not about the presidential election. It's about all of the little ones that are happening between the House and the Senate. And I think that this primary sort of discussion around the presidential election needs to be a secondary to those elections, because more than ever, people need to vote. They need to register to vote. And if the Senate does what I believe, and many people believe the Senate is going to do in the next couple of weeks, and they acquit Donald Trump of whatever he's being accused of with the evidence that's at hand, and maybe even they don't see the evidence. They willingly block the evidence from being introduced into the trial. Those senators need to be held to account, and the truth in politics needs to be rectified through those small elections. And I really hope that at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if Donald Trump gets reelected or if somebody else wins. I think it comes down to getting the people out of the Capitol Hill who don't need to be there. And at this point, over the last several weeks, months, Republicans are certainly on the top of that list of people who really need to identify what they're doing there.
There's a really interesting statement there. I can actually agree with it. It's like, look, if I had my choice in the world here of which would I rather get rid of, Trump or Mitch McConnell, aka Moscow Mitch, since they love the nickname so much, and Lindsey Graham, I'd get rid of those guys. I think they've really empowered and allowed these things to happen. If any president, no matter who they are in office, knew that what they did was going to be shown in the light and that they were going to have to face any sort of judgment for it and be held accountable, look, I think it would certainly curb on what they're going to do. But if you know that whatever you are going to do isn't going to hold you accountable for it, then why would you behave any differently? And look, every time that something happens here, and this president's allowed to get away with it, it further emboldens them. And let's be honest, who in here wouldn't take it a bit further, no matter what side you're on, right? Like if you were like, because put it this way, everybody in their own story believes that, they're the protagonist, right? That they're the ones doing the right thing. And that's the interesting part to me here. And so, if anybody seems to get a free pass, nobody holds them accountable, you can't necessarily blame them. So, look, I think he's a complete, just a situational, after effect. There's a better word for this, but he's not the cause. He's just more so like a live, status of, look, this is where we're at. And this is, again, because they empowered it. But anyway, I can go on and on and on. They have to die before that happens. I know, no term, that's crazy. But why would they vote for term limits for themselves? And that's the problem, right? Who in here has integrity? Anybody with the right mind to say, yeah, this is a great, oh, okay, all right, Eric, I see you. Look, if people are in office, and again, I know they're making a lot of money for it, all this great stuff's happening, it's hard for them to say, wait a minute, maybe I do need to have term limits and self-regulate, right? And that's just a thing, right? I know a lot of people prefer less government. I think this is something for everybody, but look, people are not good at self-regulation. They're just not. And this is a prime example of that. When they know the right thing would have term limits, but why would they do it? Because it's against their interest.
Yeah, for sure. And, going back to the discussion of who, morality in their own self, I don't think term limits make that much of a difference when we're sort of asking this question every 4 years or every 8 years, because we've got some other person that we now have to decide if we can trust. The thing is, I support term limits. I think it's important that we have those. But I also understand why people would be hesitant to do that, because you find somebody who's really good at what they do and genuine in what they do, and they really want the best interest of the country, and forcing them out because their time has come, only to be subject to whatever comes next. I don't necessarily think that's the answer. Maybe just having some more backgrounds and integrity within the process is what the answer is. Limiting things like gerrymandering and lobbying and making it these elections all about money, and all this come down to, who has the most finance to support them. That's, I think, the real situation, the real ticket. While term limits, I think, do make sense, I think it's just a Band-Aid over what will always be a problem in our political finance system that needs to be fixed soon.
So I feel you on that one. I guess another point to it that I would give is this. Look, so not only have we defined that people are just not good at self-regulation, and it's just a thing, it's just human nature. Look, life actually has its own way of doing this, and it's called death, right? If we could all live forever, imagine where we'd still be at, right? There could be, not to go dark here, but there could still be slavery, all this sort of things, because old ideas and old people didn't die off, and young ones couldn't come anew with a different sense. And I think that, government has to behave the same way. We need fresh people. We need fresh ideas. We need people that have, that's how you stay alive and well. You continue to lead forward. I think that is the way that, the world, and just in my view, right, that things should work. And it's just like at a company. If I've been at a company for so long, at some point, right, like retirement is inevitable, but I mean, it shouldn't have to take to like me get to the end of it. And maybe to give a little bit of credit to you and even PJ Thompson, I think he's touched on it here, remove money from campaigns, period. Look, I also agree with that. I think money really makes the situation sticky because, look, as much integrity as I like to say I have as a human being, and trust me, for those of you who really know me, I do have a lot more than I would say the common person, that's for sure. But guess what? I can be bought, right? There is a particular line that I will draw, absolutely, because I'm a human being, and so I think being self-aware of this and knowing that when money gets involved, it will cause you to do things that you otherwise would not do, right? Especially if it seems very minimal, right? If I said,
I think it's
"Oh,
also sorry. I think it's also important to remember that just because there's no term limits doesn't mean these Congress men and women aren't running in elections. They're not being elected by the people. If you gave me the choice between term limits on 4 term limits per member of House or 85% of the constituents vote in the election, I would pick 85% of the vote every single time.
for sure."
And that's something we can control. And that's something that I think needs to change, is the fact that there isn't more involvement in the process from the people who are actually electing it. Because your point is still valid, even with term limits.
Yeah,
If you've
yeah.
got somebody who comes into office with an archaic way of thinking, who gets voted in 1 term, and then 2 terms later, they're no longer, that thinking is no longer productive, or that thinking is no longer relevant. We should still have the votes from people to be able to come in and say, okay, we need a new face or we need new ideas. But 4 terms is still 16 years. It's still a long time for somebody to be sitting there with archaic views. And I think some people, we've seen that in Capitol Hill with the House of Representatives, where you've got people who are just sitting there basically waiting until they die because they got liked by the few people that did vote, and they're going to continue to vote for him, right? Like, if we had those votes, if we had that voice that actually needs to be there as much as we do for the primaries, and even as certainly for the general election, then we'd be able to have these conversations around the actual issues and not just around who has the popularity.
Yeah, I think that's completely fair. That's for sure. And I know 16 years is definitely a long time. Someone told me, hey, you had to 16 years in jail or something. That seems like a lifetime. But with that, not to get caught up in that particular statement, but look, I think there has to just be some sort of compromise of okay, when you do this, like, you're literally committing your life to it, you're committing your life to your constituents. And I think 16 years is enough to not only leave your fingerprint and mark, which will hopefully would be positive. It's also enough for any individual as well to be able to retire on, just in case it would be hard for them to go back to some sort of civilian lifestyle, but also not extremely damaging. And what's nice about policies and whatnot that can be changed is, like, look, even being 4 years as a president, look, one term of any presidency really is not going to mess up the entire establishment, right? And obviously we tried something new. We took somebody that was out of politics, but mind you, make no mistake, in my viewpoint, look, I think Donald Trump's like the best politician ever, right? Which I think is so funny because he was supposed to be like the anti, but yet he seems to be the strongest. He knows how to rally, to campaign, and to keep his base moving. But look, without going over and over and over on this one, I think this entire situation has caused some room for discussion here. And to bring it back with the impeachment situation, I think we really got to start asking ourselves, as a country, what is acceptable by our leaders and what isn't. And I've seen a few things in the comments. Oh, well, Clinton lies, Adam lies, all this different stuff. But yet our president has done no different there. And so, if we're going to stick it to one, I think we have to stick it to all. We have to have some sort of standardization that they all have to follow. And we can't be afraid to say, hey, regardless who you voted for, right? Whether you voted for him or you didn't, like, this is not how we conduct ourselves here in the United States. This is not how leadership should be conducting themselves as a representative of all of the citizens of this country. And we're going to hold you accountable. And I think this impeachment, that's what it's about. And I think it's disgraceful that the Senate is going to give him a pass, because it really goes back to what Trump said in the very beginning is, look, I can go shoot, I can go shoot a supporter right there, on Fifth Avenue and not lose any of them. Right. And I mean, it reminds me of the guy that was in the crowd one time that he picked at for being overweight. Is very disrespectful, very mean. And the guy gave him a pass. Right. And I just find that so interesting and intriguing to me, because look, I could have voted for you. I could have liked you. You could have been Bush, Obama, whomever. And you said that about me, or you say some of the things like what Trump said about, like, was it Ted Cruz's wife or the other
Hmm.
guy? Yeah, to me those are fighting words. Like, we're not gonna be cool, right? Until you give my wife a full apology, and even then, like, we are not gonna be cool. And it's just interesting. A lot of
Yeah.
people just sell out,
I mean,
no
and
guts.
I think it's important. Going back to the impeachment business, I think it's also important to call a spade a spade. And I think that all of these statements can be true. Hunter Biden and Joe Biden should be investigated for the work that happened with Burisma. Adam Schiff should be investigated for what he knew when he knew it about the whistleblower report. Devin Nunes should be investigated for his dealings with Lev Parnas. Rudy Giuliani should be investigated for his dealings with Lev Parnas. Heck, the entire Lev Parnas drama needs its own Mueller report at this point. There's so much to unpack with what could have been really a factor there when it comes to corruption, extortion,
Mm-hmm.
anything unrelated to or related to the President of the United States. All of that can be true, but the President of the United States committed an impeachable act at the same time. And if people say that what happened was an impeachable act, but there was no evidence of it, then you can't come back when there is evidence of it and say it's not an impeachable act anymore. And that's what we're seeing so many people in Washington, D.C. doing right now on the Republican side. That's what we're seeing so many people. And I will say, we have seen reports even today that Republicans are not on board with blocking witnesses from testimony, because I believe that there are Republicans who value their own morality over whether they are running for election or not. Maybe there's just some people out there who aren't running for re-election, so what do they have to say? If Jeff Flake was there, I'm certain he would probably be in favor of any witness testimony. But regardless, there are senators on the Republican side who are after the truth, who want to know what Donald Trump's intentions were when his dealings with Ukraine. And those are going to be the ones that actually make this thing happen. And when I say this thing happen, I mean make the truth come out to the public.
Oh,
And that's what has to happen. It
absolutely.
can't be swept under the rug. When McConnell says we don't have enough votes to block witnesses, that shouldn't be something that the leader of the Senate should be saying, because the leader of the Senate should never want to block witnesses who have credible testimony. John Bolton was the national security advisor. He was appointed by Donald Trump, who's coming out now and saying, I knew of a quid pro quo. I was told of a quid pro quo. If you had let me testify when this was in the House, we wouldn't be here. There would be different articles of impeachment, and there would be a different process in place. We can't ignore that. We have to make sure we stay the course. And I think there are some Republicans who are starting to agree with that.
Yeah, and which will be refreshing to see. And those, to me, will stand out the ones that at least have a little bit of guts, because I don't care who, which side, whatever. To try to block any sort of witnesses, to me, already screams red flag, right? Like, period, full stop. When you don't want anybody else involved, right? Oh, we don't want these witnesses X Y Z. I mean, that just looks guilty as all can be. I seriously do not understand that. Like, I look at that, and all I see is just, it's like, if I were an innocent individual, like, I would want witnesses, right? Like, and you would think that you have witnesses on both sides, but I think it does change the game a little bit when you have to go under oath. And if you decide to take a side but then lie about it, right? Not just saying take a side, let's be clear. Take a side and lie about it. It is interesting to me how all his peeps, like, all of them, seem to be serving jail time, right? There seems to be this constant situation going here, and there's one common denominator in which it revolves around. And so, look, I think, I know if I, with a good friend, right, I'm trying to put myself in their situations, right, like, oh, Terrence did me this favor, whatever. I could see myself trying to justify a favor until that puts me on an oath and puts my own freedom at jeopardy, and then that I don't want to do.
Well, and
So,
I think the easiest way to resolve all of this, and it's never going to happen, it would be for Republicans and Democrats to come together and ask for one thing. I want Donald Trump under oath to tell the Senate that he did not hold money from Ukraine for the political purposes, because I want him to say that he wasn't trying to get Joe Biden investigated by the Ukraine, and I want him to say that he wasn't holding money until it happened. He
yes.
wasn't expecting an announcement. And if I saw that happen, then I would certainly have doubts. I would definitely have doubts because the evidence is so overwhelming, and I would have to then ask myself, who do I trust more? The number of witnesses who said otherwise, or the President of the United States? But at that point, there would be no discussion about what's on the table, because he has either told the truth or he has committed an impeachable act of lying under oath, the same thing that Bill Clinton was impeached for back in '99.
And that's why I disagree with you a little bit, Jonathan, even though I agree with you most of the time. Look, I think oaths do mean something, and there's a reason why this president has been so dodgy. Like, if somebody tried to say something about me and I knew it not to be true, I'll go on record or whatever, and I'll immediately defend it and try to squash it in the meantime, right? And look, this guy has no problems stepping up and voicing his opinion, right? He's certainly one of the loud mouths in the arena. And yet, when it comes to actual testimony, something that's going to put him online and hold him accountable, because oath is a big deal, he's nowhere to be found, right? Like, he wasn't anywhere during the Mueller report. He had a chance to turn around and speak to the investigators. Did he want to do it? Nope. Even here, right? Like, there's, he could easily say, no, I want to testify. I want to speak. I want to put out there and clear it up right now with the American people, squash this and be over it. And to your point, I would, in a sense, actually agree with that. If I heard, you're on the wrong VPN. If I heard that he was actually going to testify, well, that'd give me some pause. But, he's going to testify and say something? I'd be really curious what he was going to say. And I would actually give him my undivided attention. But we know that's not what's going to happen because, and, I know it may sound like I'm insinuating here, but look, I know a lot of guilty when I see it. And this just is a common play with it. I don't get it. But anyways.
Yeah, and I hope I see what Jonathan's saying about the oaths, but I really do believe that there are people who can certainly turn a blind eye to some of the things that have been, plausible deniability when it comes to the president. But I do think there's a line where even his most avid supporters are still, before there's Trump supporters, they're Americans and they value the Constitution. And I really would hope, maybe this is naivety in my part, but I really would hope that they would see that and there would be some turn. And that's why I really hope that they advocate for it. I really hope that they start to say, the only way we're going to find out the truth is if we ask the man in question himself. And if they believe that he's innocent, then he should have no problem standing up and saying it for himself. And don't give me this crap about, it's not going to be a fair process. This is in front of the Senate run by Republicans.
It's in his favor. It's in his favor.
Why he hasn't done it yet, I think the answer is that there's not any good that can come from him lying under oath.
Exactly. And I think you just nailed it right there. To me, it's very crystal clear. Look, these people are going to quit him regardless of what happens. And if you were, and this is just my point of view, if you were innocent and you didn't do all these things that people are accusing you of, and you went and you shut it down, especially when you know the whole Senate's going to back you, that should be a case closed. It's under oath. I have no more to tell you. I went and testified. I put it down on paper as official. And bye, get out of my way. You guys are a bunch of noise, and move on. That's what I would do, right, if I were a person that truly had nothing to hide, was innocent, so on and so forth. But we know that's not going to happen. And again, all the information's out there. I think again, people are just choosing to see what they believe, and they're in their camps and they're going to stick there. And I think it's going to be more important, especially going into 2020. For people who didn't vote last time, like, that's their fault, right? Like, I never want to hear anybody complain. Oh, well, so and so didn't win, whatever it is. And I know several people that are like, I'm not going to vote. There's going to be a landslide. And right? Were you wrong on that one? And even I was wrong. Actually, I predicted. I didn't think he was going to necessarily win either. And so I'm really curious of what's going to happen here with this 2020 turnout. And by the way, just for the record, can I say, another slap against Democrats here? I wish they would stop it with this whole silly win by a landslide. I don't know if you guys know what I'm talking about, but they're like, what happens if Trump doesn't want to leave office? And they're like, we got to win by a landslide. I'm like, what is wrong with these Democratic officials? Are they out their mind? They're like, a win is a win. I don't care if it's by two votes, right?
I think the message there is that we don't want there to be any question. We don't want there to need to be a recount. I think that's what they're saying. We don't want there to be any sort of discrepancies in which illegal votes, all the things we've heard in the past. If everybody gets up and votes, then it will be a landslide.
I think,
and I agree with that mentality because. For the wrong reason. I don't think that should be the justification of supporting everybody voting. I think everybody needs to vote because everybody's voice is important and not just numbers on a chalkboard. However, the fact that we have to talk about whether or not the president is potentially going to object to the sort of transition of power is a little concerning. But I mean, at this point, it wouldn't surprise anyone, would it?
No, it absolutely wasn't. And he's even talked about it and joked about it here and there, which is concerning in and of itself. But look, I guess like from my standpoint, like I understand exactly what you're saying. I understand what they meant by it. But my biggest problematic viewpoint of that is it plays into the situation is rigged. Like remember, Trump expected that he was going to lose to Clinton, right? And he's like, the whole game is rigged. The whole thing is rigged, right? Like I've heard the soundbite many, many times, and yet he won. And so the way I look at it is like, look, a win's a win. If it happens, people have to respect the democracy behind it. And it's more so a viewpoint of, again, I can see why you want like a landslide situation. I don't think anybody want to see it any different, but I also think that's a easy cop out, and it's what also turns people out not to vote. Again, just from people I worked with, not saying that this is the majority of you. Like I want to be very cognizant of that. This is just my little experience here in a suburban part of Atlanta. But look, there's a lot of people that believed the landslide was going to occur, and guess what they didn't do? They didn't vote, right? And I think this is exactly where we're at. And so I'll mention here, Jason, this is a big topic, lots of thought circling. I honestly feel like when it comes to impeachment, both sides are exceedingly entrenched in their beliefs. And I agree. And this is the whole purpose of having a trial is you got to set back a bit of your beliefs like a judge would have to do and hear the facts and make a decision. And I think that's the problem is we are actively ignoring those facts. And that should never be the case. I mean, we all have bias because we're human beings, and that's just the way that we're engineered and designed. We're going to have them. But I think you really have to go in and pause for a second and go, okay, wait a minute. These are the facts. And I get it. These are my team members. This is my party. But here, right is right, wrong is wrong, and abide by it. And then last, Jonathan Wood, they thought Hillary would win by a landslide. Exactly. And we saw how that turned out.
So, and just to respond to Jason's comment, it is very complicated. There's a lot of opinions. There's a lot of things being thrown out there, but really it's not that deep. And what I mean by that is there's not the Clinton impeachment trial contained like 95,000 pages of evidence, 95,000 pages of testimony. I mean, just an insane, this was back before digital. So it makes sense that a lot of this wasn't on the online record, but there was so much of it. And really the question was, did Bill Clinton engage in the actions that he was being accused of? And after that, did he lie about it when he was being accused of it? When he was under oath for it? Did he lie about what he was being accused of? And those are the two questions that really this came down to. And the fact of the matter was he did lie about it, and he did engage in those acts. And not only was he acquitted, he was reelected. He had been elected. So in this case, Jason, it's really the same situation. The difference is, are we talking about somebody receiving, what we'll call a sexual act in the Oval Office, or is this about financial aid from the United States pocketbook, from the wallet of the greatest economic country in the world, one of the greatest economic countries in the world, being held hostage by a president that's supposed to be funding a country that's under distress from a very powerful country like Russia? Did he use that funding as leverage to better himself in an election? And the answer to that question, if it's yes, is very different in my mind. I think there's a very different outcome. And that's really what this comes down to. Did he do that? And if he did that, he did lie about it. He's already lied about it several times. So I think it's only fair to put him under oath and make him lie about it under oath so that it's the same thing. But it's not that complicated. There's a lot of testimony. There's a lot of evidence. There's a lot of he said, she said. There's a lot of people saying, oh, I heard on the phone that he was talking in a restaurant and he asked, how is Ukraine? Is Ukraine going to do the investigation? With the evidence that John Bolton has right now, the testimony that he could provide, there could be no need for any of that other evidence. There's a clear-cut yes or no. And the fact that the Republicans in the Senate are blocking it now, and the fact that the White House blocked it when the trial was in the House, should tell you enough that you need to know. It's not that serious. It's not that deep. The trial isn't that big, but the ramifications are. The impeachment is. And that's what it needs to come down to. The discussion around it, whatever you make of it. But the facts at hand, that's what you need to be talking about.
100%. And so with that, obviously, we'll be, as we get ready to come to a close here, because I know it's getting a little bit later, Jeremy, and I've got like a family circus going on. I'm going to help out the wife here. But look, so I know we'll have to follow up here momentarily with things that unfold. And again, whether you agree or disagree, we clearly would love to hear a lot of your thoughts there in the chat. I find it very interesting, and I try to understand everybody's point of view and try to follow any sort of logic. But it's going to be interesting one way or another. So here we are, starting off 2020 with a bang, that's for sure. But with that, Jeremy, I'll just turn to you. Any closing thoughts?
Yep, I've got two closing thoughts. I'm going to post a couple of links
Sure.
here. Most importantly, as Jonathan mentioned, and I think it's very, very important to always remember this. I had it blocked up just a second ago. The Iowa caucus is like tomorrow. No, it's not. It's very soon, though. And if you don't know when you are supposed to be voting for the Democratic primary, if you can vote in the Democratic primary, depending on what you registered, I recommend turbovote.org. Will give you all of the information, all the resources you need to know to determine if you need to vote, where you need to vote, and when you need to vote.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, I think it's very important that we all keep in mind that the only way we get away from the divisiveness, away from the questions, away from the facts versus opinions is number one, stating the facts and then supporting each other in stating facts. And I will continue to do that to anybody who wants to have a discussion around the facts, who wants to come at me with some very specific information that will help me learn and will help me grow. And I would encourage anybody out there to accept the same challenge.
Absolutely. I could not agree more. I'm with you on that completely. So with that, Jason, it's good you got to hop in on the back end here. I know we missed out on Eric for a little bit, and Jonathan, we always appreciate your thoughts. That's for sure. And I got a big cat trying to get on me yet again. But anyway, all right. So that will conclude our fun little lovely live stream this time, and I'm looking forward to catching you all here again sooner than later.
We'll do them more often, that's for sure.
Got that right. All right. Bye, everyone.